Hello and welcome to Talking Aussie Books, a weekly podcast bringing readers and writers of Australian fiction together. I'm Claudine Tinellis. As an avid reader and passionate advocate for Australian fiction, I have made it my mission to spotlight local talent. So if you're looking for your next read or simply want to learn more about the Australian literary scene, this podcast is for you. Grab yourself a cuppa, sit back and relax. This episode is brought to you by HarperCollins Australia. Listeners, I'm sure you'll remember me telling you numerous times that an author I've interviewed on the podcast is a friend or someone I'd met and become acquainted with at an event, conference or festival. And that's mostly due to the fact that the Australian writing and publishing community is a small place. And given the number of events I've attended over the last 8 years, it's inevitable I'll bump into writers on the journey. I guess it'll be no surprise then to learn that my next guest author is someone whose name I've known for some time, an author whose path has crossed with mine on more than one occasion over the years, and for whom the dream of finally becoming a published author has been realised. Libby Iriks is a Perth-based author and former commissioning editor of romance for a boutique publishing house in the UK. Combining her passion for story and romance has resulted in publication of her debut novel, Home to the Heart Country, a moving, beautifully romantic story about one woman's quest for identity and a sense of belonging. Released at the end of last month by HQ Fiction, Home to the Heart Country heralds a bright future for this rising star. So to that end, I'm delighted to welcome Libby to the podcast today. Hi, Libby.
Thank you so much, Claudine. That was a lovely introduction.
Congratulations on the publication of the book. I'm so happy for you. How are you feeling?
Oh my God, it's just been amazing. So I think we're not even a whole week into the book being out on bookshelves, but I've just had so much amazing feedback. I was just saying before, this story has taken a long time to get out into the world. You know, my family has known that I've been working on it for a very long time. So for them to see it out and to read it, you know, and to understand what I've been working on for all this time has been amazing. Yeah, but to see it out there finally, you know, after all this time, it's unreal. It's a dream come true, honestly.
What have you been doing to mark the occasion? Are you planning on doing events? Did you have a launch? Tell me about the last few days.
I spent my release day in bed with the flu. I was not well. Yes, but I marked the occasion by listening to the audiobook, which is fabulous. That was, you know, at least something I could do even though I was unwell. Then I've been on social media and seeing people's reviews and comments, which has been fabulous. Today, after we hop off this call, I'll be starting my book tour. So I'll be off to my very first event. I'll be launching it on Wednesday with family and friends, which is going to be very exciting. We'll have it at a bar in the city, so that's going to be fun. And I've just got some other library events lined up for this week. We're going to jam pack it all in this week before the Christmas craziness starts. Then there'll be some more events lined up next year.
So, Libby, as I told you before we started recording, I adored this book. But for those who haven't yet read it, I wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about the story.
Sure. So Home to the Heart Country is about a woman named Beth whose chronic loneliness is a direct result of a nomadic upbringing and severe social anxiety. Her dad died when she was young, and her mother's need to constantly move from place to place meant that Beth grew up feeling lonely and isolated, and she hasn't really been able to break out of that rut even in adulthood. It also means that she's developed a bone-deep desire to find somewhere to belong and also to have a home of her own. And when the story begins, she thinks she's found that in Townsville. She's lived there for the last 4 years. She has a permanent and stable job, and although she feels invisible at work, she adores the cute little cottage she rents on the outskirts of town. But her world is thrown into turmoil when she learns that the cottage, which is the only home she's ever known, is about to be sold out from under her. Then she gets a phone call from a solicitor in Western Australia who tells her she's the sole beneficiary in the will of an aunt she never even knew she had. But there's a catch. She has to travel to a small town on the other side of the country and live there for a period of 3 months in order to claim the life-changing inheritance. Determined to do just that so she can buy the beloved cottage, she crosses the Nullarbor and lands in Carlup, a town that soon has her questioning who she is and where she came from.
So can you tell me a little bit about where the idea for this story came from?
It's a story written from my own lived experience with social anxiety. It's something that I've suffered from in varying degrees throughout my life, right from a very young age. And in turn, over the years, it's impacted my mental health. So back in 2013, I'd experienced a fairly low period, in my life. I was essentially feeling really lonely and isolated. You know, I had friends and close family members and that sort of thing, but I don't know what it was. I just felt misunderstood and lonely, I guess. So it was in 2013 when a friend offered the use of her holiday home in a gorgeous little town in the southwest of Western Australia called Nannup. So it's only 40 minutes from Margaret River. So if you've heard of Margaret River or know anything about that area, it's in that region. So on my first walk through that town, I just fell in love with it. I'm sure it was the first bit of spring weather we'd had in a while. So the sun was shining, the birds were singing, and the streets were lined with flower boxes. And it just seemed, at the time, I was reading a lot of Australian rural romance. So my first thought was this would be a great place to set a story, and I decided to write it. So that's what sparked the idea, I guess, based on my own experiences with social anxiety, and that's where the character came from. I just fell in love with that place, and I could see how a character like me, so a woman who felt lonely, isolated, wanted somewhere to fit in, could find that in a place so beautiful like that. That's where it all started, way back in 2013.
You and I were talking a little bit before we started recording, but I really appreciated your exploration of social anxiety in this book because it really made me understand, it really made me get inside the head of somebody who will suffer social anxiety. And I think from the outside looking in, it can be very hard for somebody to truly understand what it is like. It gave me pause to reflect how somebody like Beth, who is obviously gorgeous looking, intelligent, hardworking, how somebody like her can be ostracized and can feel so lonely. And I think what you've done so beautifully in this book, Libby, is given voice to Beth's innermost fears, the things that she would tell herself to make it easier to cope with these sort of what most people would think of as quite normal interactions. So I wondered if you could talk me through that and how you gave Beth that voice.
I guess I've taken my own experiences with social anxiety and really, I guess it's been deep in her point of view. You know, I've given her the challenges that I have. So I was quite easily able to get inside her head and put that on the page. You know, the berating herself, the talking herself down, the uncertainty, the questioning of other people's intentions and things like that. So I guess I was able to draw on that from what I've been experiencing my whole life. But I just love, Claudine, that you've taken that deeper understanding of this condition away from it, even though you don't experience it yourself. That was my intention. I guess one part of writing a character like this came from a place of I never saw myself on the page, reading, especially in romance. You know, female protagonists are often strong, independent women, confident, they're not afraid to say what they think and feel. You know, that's great. Sometimes I love reading stories like that, but other times I just want to see myself and see someone struggle the way I do and learn from their experiences. So that was one part of it. I wanted to write for people like me so they could see themselves on the page. But the other side of it is helping other people understand what it's like to live with social anxiety, because like you say, you understand the idea of what social anxiety is, but you can't fully grasp how debilitating it can be. You just live with it every moment. You know, you step outside your front door and you're switched on, you're hypervigilant, that sort of thing. So I think that was important to show Beth in very simple everyday situations where she's second guessing herself and not trusting herself to ingratiate herself with the people around her. So that was very, very important to me right from the beginning. I didn't understand the extent to what I wanted to achieve, but I knew right from that very first spark of the idea that I wanted the character to be, you know, someone who was unsure of herself and her place in the world. But it really did develop, and I realised along the way that I was writing an own voice's story. I didn't realise that for a long time, but the more I learned about myself, the more I realised, yeah, I've got something to say here. So it's been great, and I'm so glad that you've connected with the story and Beth's experiences in that way and have come to a greater understanding of people who live with this anxiety.
Look, I want to say that I still found Beth to be quite courageous because it really took a lot of courage for her to leave the certainty of this life that she had built for herself in Townsville, however lonely, but she was very happy with that scenario. And then suddenly she's flung out of that very comfortable situation and having to go across the country to a new place where she really didn't know anybody and didn't really understand why she was the beneficiary of her great aunt's will. And so, despite the fact that she's not the typical strong female character that we would see in romance stories, I still feel like it took a great amount of courage for her to do what she did.
Absolutely. And I think it all comes down to perception of what strength is, right? Some romances are about women who are strong in the sense that they're confident and outgoing, because that's what I see. I guess I perceive that to be strength. But absolutely. And that's part of Beth's journey, is she's learning to be brave and to be vulnerable, which she hates doing, you know. So for her to put herself in a situation of uncertainty when she's had a bit of stability for a certain amount of time, yeah, that is definitely something that she has to learn along the way, is to be vulnerable. And we see that bravery coming out on the page. And she says that to herself, you know, she's trying to be brave. So she takes these little risks along the way.
You've given Beth a lot of your own characteristics, and you're deep in Beth's point of view, and that she's filled with a lot of the things that you've had to face in your past. But was that hard for you, Libby? Were you scared to put yourself on the page like this?
Yeah. So just like Beth has to learn to be vulnerable, I've had to learn to do that throughout this experience, especially in the lead up to publication, where I'm talking about it on social media, especially now that the book is out, and I'm talking about it with people like yourself, and I'm about to head out and talk to people in libraries and, you know, meet readers and talk about my experiences. So yes, absolutely, it's been scary. Putting it on the page, I don't think was as scary, because it's my truth, you know. It was a way I was able to, I guess, understand myself better. And I knew that in the end, the people in my life, my friends, my family, readers, the wider public are going to really understand more about people who suffer from this condition. So I didn't find the actual writing of it scary, but in talking about it and being open and honest about my experiences, and to admit that all the things that Beth experiences, you know, her reactions and her behaviour in some situations is often how I would react or behave in situations like that. So although she's not me, her thought processes and things like that comes from within me. Do you know what I mean? So I think to admit that is a scary thing to do, but I'm more than willing to do that and put myself out there if it means people come to a greater understanding of others like me. Yeah.
And I think that's so brave, Libby. And I don't mean this in any patronising way, but like you were saying, you and I were saying before we started recording, I think it behoves us and people like you who are willing to be brave to do this so that people can understand more about the condition.
It's very easy for us to judge others in social situations. You know, you might see someone off in a corner or sitting, you know, not wanting to be with a group, and you think, oh, what's wrong with them? You know, what, do they not like me? You know, that sort of thing. We can't put ourselves in other people's shoes often. So I think it's important just to highlight these issues so that if you are in a situation and you see someone who, you know, is unable or seems to be unwilling to put themselves out there, there might be other causes or reasons why, not the reasons that you think. Yeah.
Now, while this isn't really a mother-daughter story, I did enjoy the kind of roller coaster ride that Beth goes on when she learns things about her mother that she didn't understand, and trying to come to terms with her mother's actions while she was alive. And it made me think that as a mother to three, you know, I've often said to my kids that we as parents don't always know what we're doing, and we do things that we believe are right at the time. And it can be so easy for our children to judge us on our past actions. And I think you've explored this so beautifully in this novel. Was that something that you were particularly concerned to explore?
I think Beth's relationship with Rosie is very much an antagonistic character in a way in the story, but I didn't want her to be that two-dimensional, you know, horrible mum. I wanted to make her real, and also the fact that it was just her and Beth for so long, and Beth loved her. She was her mum, you know, they only had each other. But it was just her lifestyle that impacted Beth in such a profound way. But I think in wanting to explore that relationship and find the positives in it, it came about so that Rosie became this real character. I think she took on a more important role in the story through that exploration. and Beth discovering, answers about her family and where she came from and why her mother lived the life she wanted to live. So yeah, it was a fun relationship to explore, and it didn't start out, I didn't intentionally set out to write the relationship the way it panned out, but I was really happy with how it came about. And readers so far have been quite interested in Rosie and that dynamic between the two.
Yeah, and it kind of made me wonder whether or not you might write a prequel to talk about Rosie a little bit more, and so we can get an understanding about Rosie and how she came to be the way that she was.
That's so funny because someone else has mentioned that too. and even my family, they're wanting a prequel. But the funny thing is I'm studying my Master of Creative Writing, and one of the units I had to write a short story. So I thought, brilliant, I'm going to write a short story about Rosie and how she and Bryce met. So it's only a 3,000 word story, it's not quite a prequel, but I've got that little gem waiting to share with readers. So
Okay, so I was utterly captivated by the WA setting. Now, listeners may not be aware, but Libby, you and I met in person for the first time, I think, at the Festival of Fiction in Perth in October earlier this year. But directly after that festival, my husband and I did some traveling, and our adventures took us to the southwest region of WA. Now, I visited Esperance and Albany, Denmark, and the Margaret River before coming back to Perth. And so the setting of this novel felt quite familiar to me, and I became almost painfully familiar with the many small towns and suburbs that end in the letters up. So there was like Joondalup, Karrinyup, Manjimup, Yallingup, Pardalup, Kawarramup, and then up.
Yep. It's correct.
Mentioned earlier, Nanup was the inspiration for the setting of this story. Tell me more.
Yeah, like I said, we visited for the first time in 2013 and I just fell in love with the place. We were staying at a friend's holiday home and we made a few trips over the years down there because it's just it's a place to go to get away, especially in winter when it's cold and, you can put the fire on and there are animals roaming, kangaroos jumping through the backyards, and it's just a really beautiful place. It was always going to be that setting that I wanted to capture, I guess, in the story. I did fictionalize the town just because I wanted that ability to take creative license. But when I was thinking of what to call the town, in the early days of writing the story, I think I'd called it Blackwood because there's a Blackwood River running through the town. I ended up changing that. I wanted to come up with something different. And it's funny that you say about all the towns in WA, or a lot of towns ending in up, and that comes from the Noongar language. So a lot of place names are taken from that. And so I found an online Noongar dictionary or glossary. I was just searching through that and looking and came across the word Karlup, which I learned it's taken from the words Karl, which is fireplace or hearth, which essentially is the heart of the home. So Karlup as a place name means heart country. And yeah, I mean, it's just a theme for the story, isn't it? That you're coming home and this is where your heart belongs and you recognise the place as this is where you belong. So I was really chuffed that I came across that word and chose to name the town as that. It fits in perfectly with the West Australian setting, I think.
Talking about belonging, there was a wonderful ceremony, an Indigenous ceremony that you described in the book. And I wondered if you could tell me how that came about and what sort of research you needed to do in order to bring that particular ceremony to the page.
Good question. So I had heard on a number of occasions the wonderful Anita Heiss say that you can't write the next great Australian novel without putting Indigenous people and culture on the page, which, is very true. So I took that as a challenge, and I love the Aboriginal culture and I wish that we could, as a nation, embrace it in a more profound way. So I decided, that I wanted to try and explore that in the novel. So there is a character in the story, Marge, who owns the local cafe where Beth ends up taking a job, and she's an Indigenous character, and it's through her that we are exposed to some beautiful elements of Aboriginal culture. I started researching different Aboriginal customs, traditions, ceremonies to kind of explore what I could bring into the story. And I came across a welcome baby to country ceremony that a few places around the country have held. I thought that's actually quite perfect because I had already decided that the reason Marge was needing to hire someone was because she was becoming a grandmother. So her daughter was having a baby. So I thought, well, that's perfect. It fits in so well. So I, found some great resources online about this ceremony and what happens. I wrote that in there and it really strengthened the themes of the story overall. I was so happy with how that scene turned out. I did have a sensitivity reader. And this was bizarre. So I found, it was through the Australian Society of Authors website, I found a sensitivity reader. He was a Noongar man, which is important because he's from that region for where the story is set. But he not long moved to Nannup. So he lives in the town that inspired the story. So that was a really cool connection there. But he read through all of those relevant parts and made some suggestions because there were a few things I hadn't got quite right. So he helped nail all the details there and reflecting it correctly and respectfully. So I was very happy with that scene and how it all turned out. And the fact that, it's a celebration of Indigenous culture within the story.
And belonging. And I think it really did have a profound effect on Beth too.
The whole purpose of that ceremony is to welcome the babies to their mob, I guess, so that they always know where they come from and, where they belong, which is what Beth that's her desire, right? And she'd started questioning from memory at that time where it was she came from. So I think it happened at the perfect time for her where it really impacted her and got her thinking. So yeah, very happy with how it all came about and fit together. It's like all the puzzle pieces, you've got to get the puzzle pieces fitting right.
Yeah. So Libby, I know that you've been writing and working as a writing mentor for some time. And like you mentioned, this book was a long time in the making. So I wondered if you could share with me a little bit more about your journey to publication.
As I said, it was 2013 when I first got the spark of this idea. It took me about 2 years to get a manuscript finished. That first manuscript was very, very different to what it is now. I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. I think the extent of my planning was jotting down some dot points for scene ideas. Away I went. By the time I'd exhausted all those dot points, I was about 30,000 words in and I needed to inject some conflict or some tension somehow. So I gave Beth a stalker, which is completely irrelevant to the story I wanted to tell, but that was, the best I could do at the time. I think it was about 2015, I went to my first Romance Writers of Australia conference and I pitched the manuscript there. Got a fabulously good rejection, as we say in the writing world, which goes beyond, sorry, it's not for us, and tells you in excruciating detail why the publisher can't accept your manuscript, but it gives you an idea of what you need to work on. So I'm very grateful for that rejection now because it was definitely a wake-up call that I needed to sit on that manuscript for a while. It was too important to me to just keep pitching and submitting to places. I wanted to turn it into the story that I knew it could be. So that rejection really flipped a switch in me, I guess. And I was like, okay, I need to not pursue publication yet. I need to learn how to write. Yeah. So I spent the next 10 years practicing my craft. I read countless articles, I took courses, attended conferences, entered competitions. I wrote other things. I wrote short stories, a novella, even another full-length manuscript that's sitting in a drawer. But I studied story structure, and that is really what made all of the difference. Understanding how story works and needs to develop and combine character development with plot development. So that was the big thing for me. After all of that learning, I decided in 2023 I was ready to give it another go. In that time, I'd tried twice more to start Beth's story and I could see the improvements, but I still wasn't sure where to take it or, the direction I needed to go. But it was in 2023, I sat down again. I was halfway through the second draft of that version of the story and I pitched to Rachel Donovan from HQ at the RWA conference and she was very enthusiastic, which was very exciting. But I was honest and I said, I'm only still working on the second draft. but I'll have it ready soon. But I finished that second draft and got some feedback from some beta readers that it gave me an aha moment, and I just had this brilliant idea of how to really strengthen the story's conflict. So I was like, okay, I need to write a third draft here. So by the time the 2024 conference rolled around, I was nearing the end of writing that third draft. I did pitch again at that 2024 conference to a few more people. And then in November that year, I sent it out to everyone I'd pitched to over the last two conferences, which is something I'll touch on there because some people think they just need to get their submissions out straight away after pitching. You don't. Rachel still remembered my pitch. She was very keen on the story, and I'd submitted it to her over a year later. So there's no rush. I sent it out in the November, and I think within 2 weeks, Rachel had made an offer. So that was how it all came about. So in the end, it kind of did happen, I guess, quite easily. But that was because of all the years I'd spent studying and developing this story and my craft. So the story itself took a long time to germinate and come to fruition, but the pitching in the end was quite painless, thank God. Except for the first one, that was very painful.
Wonderful story, Libby. And I guess you've touched on something really important there, a couple of things really. And one is a great tip for people who are pitching in person and who, and like me, I've been guilty of that in the past too, where you feel like, oh, somebody has said yes to you. So you feel like you really need to just send them something straight away because then they might forget who you are or forget the book, or you kind of want to strike while the iron is hot. But I think, yes, you're absolutely right in saying that sometimes waiting can be a lot more effective than simply, sending something out when it's not quite ready. And I think the other thing that you touched on really well, is RWA. So you and I are both members of this wonderful organisation. So tell me about what being a member of RWA means for you.
It means community, for sure. We know each other from RWA, though we'd not met in person. So you get to know people in the industry. You develop those friendships. Over here in WA, we meet monthly, like local members meet monthly for write-ins. So we've really started to develop some strong bonds and, getting to know each other's projects and cheering each other on and all the rest of it. So that's been fabulous. Also makes conference a bit less scary when you know some faces. But no, the yearly conferences are just so inspiring and motivating. Just to be immersed in that world of books and romance and other writers, it's just invaluable. It keeps you going. There were a number of years during my writing journey where I kind of stepped back a bit because I just wasn't in a good headspace. I had stuff going on in my personal life and I didn't have the emotional capacity to focus on my writing. But once my writing became my focus and, I wanted to fully ingratiate myself into the community, RWA has just been a godsend. Yeah.
You might know that there are a lot of aspiring writers who listen to this podcast, and given everything that you've been through in the last little while, I wondered if you had any other tips that you could offer writers out there.
Sure. So I think if you're a new writer, you're in the early days of writing and working on a story, write what you're passionate about, for starters. There's no point writing to a market. If you're not passionate about a story or, the issues that you're writing about, you're not going to develop that voice that is so crucial to writing a good story. You need to be passionate and know your characters innately in order to find your voice, I think. You also need to learn. I'm a big proponent for, former teacher here, so I'm a big proponent for learning and just soaking up all the knowledge that's out there, taking what you feel will work for you and implementing that into your writing. For writers who are coming to the point where they are getting closer towards perhaps publication, I think you really need to put your blinkers on sometimes and focus on your own book and its audience. It's very easy to see what other writers are doing in, the world of social media. We see a lot of success stories and things like that. We see people who perhaps started writing at the same time as you 12 years ago and are publishing all these works, and you're still working on that first manuscript that means so much to you. Probably sounds familiar. You just need to focus on your own race. Just focus on that story. on getting it out there and doing the best you can do. Everyone's journey is different. We've all got different commitments in life, the time that we can spend on our books. So focus on your journey and getting yourself to where you need to be.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing. That's wonderful advice, Libby. Now, on a final note, if there was one thing you'd like readers to take away from this beautiful novel, what would that be?
So at its core, Beth's story is one of self-discovery. It celebrates diversity and the unique strengths of the individual. So I want readers to walk away being more compassionate and understanding not only of others' differences, but of their own. No one is perfect. We're all beautiful in our imperfection. And I think the world would be a much better place if we all embrace that notion.
So well said, Libby. Thank you very much for sharing that. Libby, I'll say it again. I adored Home to the Heart Country, and I cannot wait to see what comes next for you. Thank you so very much for joining me on Talking Aussie Books today.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
That's it for this episode, folks. Hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. If so, I'd love it if you'd leave a review on your preferred listening platform, which may include Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Amazon Music. Until next time, friends, happy reading.